again, everyone. We are back again in IIDA Summit Day 2 with yet another interesting workshop. We apologize for the delay, but we make sure that this is worth the wait. We thank our sponsors Insulpro and Bromik Heating to believe in our vision. The venue is designed by Manticore Designs. Now there will be a workshop on nature-inspired design thinking taken by architect Chetan Shivaprasad. Chetan Shivaprasad is principal designer at Kham Design and Hampi Design Center for Design. The workshop is on a detailed understanding of why to study nature, what is nature-inspired design, and how to learn from nature and its implementation. We welcome you, sir.
Thank you, Rhoda. Am I live?
Yes, sir.
Okay, yeah. Good evening, everyone. Sorry about the delay in starting the session. There was some technical glitch and we had to resolve that. So anyways, welcome to this journey which we are going into in terms of looking at how do we look at nature for inspiration, and what do we really understand by this concept called nature-inspired design thinking. And it is some kind of a thought which we need to go into, where I've been working on nature-inspired design thinking for the last 15 plus years, working with various students on really addressing inspirations from nature. I will also talk to you about my sharing of what is design thinking and what is nature-inspired design thinking. In brief, design thinking is a process which was started by the Stanford University of Design, which said that any problem which needs to be solved in any field needs to be addressed in a particular format. And they took inspirations from the way designers work on solving their issues, on the kind of ideation, on the kind of opening up venues and working on it. So Stanford literally looked at the way designers solve problems and took it forward and said that let's create a process of problem solving and create a very unique program called design thinking, and has a school on design thinking for quite some time. So just a small brief. I'm architect Chetan Shivaprasad. I have an architectural firm called Kham Design, and where we work on issues of sustainability. We work on various other issues of construction systems. And we've been practicing for the last 23 years and have an office in Bangalore and Hampi. And I also run an institute called the Hampi Center for Design, which is a hub for design dialogue, where we conduct a lot of workshops related to design, related to problem solving, related to tensibility, and many more such activities. We've collaborated with a lot of people to work on this. So being a hardcore environmentalist in the sense that I would like to see how I can lead light on planet Earth. I've also been a travel freak, traveling across the country to literally all states of India, and also to quite a few places across the globe, exploring architectural languages, exploring culture, and things like that. And for the last few years, have also been putting ourselves as a design thinker in the format of what Stanford University talks about, where we've been working with people from various genres, not just architects, not just designers, but people from the finance background, people from the management background, people from the education background, and trying to see how we can address our day-to-day problems and try and solve it through design thinking. And in this journey, we've kind of looked at inspirations like Jean Beers, where through her biomimicry institution and the Stanford University's School of Design's thought, we've kind of come together a very unique, very interesting program, which is the 7-step process of design thinking, which I'll be sharing with all of you today. I've also been teaching in various schools of architecture and been a visiting faculty across the country, I've taken sessions at SPA Delhi, SPA Vijayawada, and across Bangalore, Tumkur, and many more such places, Kerala, and many more such places. So this is a little brief about me, and especially in terms of design thinking, we've had close to around 1,200 to 1,300 people who have been part of the design thinking process, with whom we have done workshops and where we've explored this kind of an idea with them. So, in brief, what is design thinking? Design thinking is an iterative, which means that it is not a step one, step two, step three process, but something which is cyclical, an iterative process where you can jump from one point to another point, in which we seek to understand the user, because design thinking is purely anthropocentric way of looking at design at problem solving, which means that the human beings become core of the challenge. So we need to understand what the human being wants to address, what is his problems, then question the assumptions which comes with a problem, and how do you define a problem. So there's a process called problem definition. So you first empathize on the user, which is what we talk about understanding the user. We change certain assumptions and redefine the problem statement, which is step two according to the, if I'm looking at a 5-step process. And then ideate on various creative or a crazy set of ideas, which looks at very unique ways of looking at the same problem. So this is generally done through a series of design sprints called, where we do a lot of brainstorming activities on ideation part, and then we kind of prototype and then test the prototype. So where this, if you find that the prototype has certain challenges, you can go back to the empathize position and restart the whole activity, or you can go back to redefining the problem statement. That's what we mean by the iterative process of design thinking. But when I was looking at this, we said that there's some challenge which we are missing out on design thinking processes. And that's where we said, let's look at nature. Let us kind of readdress in terms of how nature is solving problems. And why should we look at nature is the next question which came. Because when you know the why of anything, when you know the why of anything, then the way you address that why becomes very, very clear, right? So I will ask you a simple question as to when did you think human beings came on Earth in a 12-hour clock of Earth's evolution, which meant that Earth has evolved for the last 4 billion years, approximately 4 billion years. And if Earth started evolving like a ball of mass at 00 hour, and it has taken us 12 hours to come where we are today, when do you think human beings came on planet Earth? You'll be surprised if I say that we have come into a planet Earth in the last 3 seconds, in the last 3 seconds of Earth's evolution, which means that we are only a blip of a movement in Earth's evolution. That means that Earth has kind of, just imagine our recorded history has been around 50,000 years, and what we see as civilized history, of what we see as what communities and things like that, has been hardly 5 to 10,000 years. And and if I'm looking at dinosaurs, they literally lived on planet Earth for close to around 200 plus million years, 200 million years. So we are only a blip in Earth's evolution. And Earth or nature, if I can substitute the word Earth with nature, I would say Earth or nature has evolved, has solved problem for the last 4 billion years, which we are trying to look at in the last, let's say, from the time, if I talk about industrial revolution or even our IT revolution, which is happening right now, say it could be for the past maximum 100 years or 100, 200 years, right? We've been looking at problem solving in a very unique way in the last 200 years. But nature has been solving it for the last few billion years. Humongous amount of information in the nature's library. So it is imperative that we start tapping into this um, powerhouse of knowledge from nature, because when you look at nature, nature kind of inspires you in such a way that you see a butterfly and you see how butterfly works from being a caterpillar to building its own cocoon, growing inside it, and then bursts open, comes out, and becomes a butterfly. So just imagine the amount of complexity that butterfly itself has as a small organism. Or just look at a small mosquito and try and understand how this mosquito would have built all those mechanisms to just draw blood, or and how it would have been created per se. So kind of mutations it would have gone through. It goes back to our biological learning, no, which says what is theory of evolution. Theory of evolution is basically survival of the fittest by Charles Darwin. What he says is theory of evolution is survival of the fittest by natural selection. I think the, the last three words are very critically important for us to understand. That which means that nature has been looking at surviving only the fittest because of their natural selection. It does not mean that whoever is stronger have been able to survive, but whoever has been stronger in this given situation and how they have overpowered that situation has allowed them to survive further. Say, I'll just give you an example of ourselves itself. We are now one of the most, we consider ourselves one of the most powerful organisms on planet Earth, or animals on planet Earth. And we would have had our own brothers or cousins, because we, if I'm looking at ourselves, we are Homo sapiens, but there would be other homos also in the prehistoric period where they were massive in size. They were giants when compared to Homo sapien. They had much brutal strength among themselves. But how do you think humans, Homo sapiens, were able to defeat what the other homos were capable of? Was simply because, I mean, I remember the writings by on Sapiens, that book Sapiens, where Noah Harari talks about the power of gossip. Homo sapiens had this beautiful power of gossip, where gossip in the sense that they could visualize something which was non-existent and kind of ideate on that, just the way we generally talk about the word gossip today in terms of people sitting down and gossiping about what the neighbor did or what happens in society. But if I really look at this power of imagination, of gossip, of saying that, of visualizing what would happen and verbally communicate it with other members of the tribe and say, from here, can we get onto this journey of looking at solving a particular problem, as to could be at that point of time, what if a lion attacked us, and how do we plan ourselves, how do we strategize ourselves in working with that lion. So it is this beautiful idea that we've kind of had, and because of this natural selection of gossip, we became the survivor. And the other bigger species, including, if I'm talking about, forget homos, even if I'm talking about the other animals who are much stronger, we've been able to take them out of our equations very fast. From literally 80% of the land being forest, we are now brought it down to 18% of forest across the globe in the last 50 years. So we've kind of been occupying planet Earth tremendously. So it's important that we also look at whatever is remaining of Earth's evolution and try and decode that for our problem statement. Do you think Earth has not solved problems of economics? Has Earth not solved problems of structural innovation? Have Earth not solved problems of um, cyclical processes? Many such things. definitely Earth would have solved issues of economics in the way we look at how the tree puts its best chlorophyll into young leaves and draws it out from the dying leaves. And look at the economics of it. There's nothing called waste in nature. As I go further and as I talk to you about nature rules, you will realize that there's so many things which nature has been doing. So, yeah, in this blip of 3 seconds, what have we done? We have created the greatest specific plastic soup. This is one example of what is kind of an implication we have done, where we throw all our waste into the ocean. That today, in the Pacific Ocean, which is the biggest ocean on planet Earth, we don't have a single fish without a strand of plastic in it, right? And we are not too far off in trying to build our own, extinction if you go in the same process. I will just take this further with you, right? Now, what do you mean by Great Pacific plastic soup or the garbage patch? Basically, there are two swirls which you see on the left-hand top of the screen from Japan to the United States, where both the countries have been throwing a lot of their waste into the Pacific Ocean. And because of the GARs, the undercurrents of the Great Pacific area, there are two Pacific GARs, which is the West Pacific GAR and the East Pacific GAR. It's like a mixie. Okay, design thinking, as I rightly said, you can look at the image on the right, which talks about the 5 steps: empathize, define, ideate, prototype, and test. And implement is the final thing, but these are the 5 important steps in the Stanford's model of design thinking. And then we said, why should I look at nature? And we had a discussion of the Earth, and we have been on this planet Earth for the last 3 seconds alone. Are you able to see the screen with the 3 seconds ago, Madam Rachana? Okay, anyways, I'm not getting a response there, but let's move forward. Hopefully, this is working. Okay, so the Great Pacific Plastic Soup is what I was talking about, is where the two GARs which you see on the left-hand top corner of the PPT, where between the United States and Japan, where you have the two GARs, the East Pacific GAR and the West Pacific GAR, which kind of rotates like a mixie and starts collecting all the plastics which are thrown into the patch. Because we only have places to either we throw things into a landfill today, or we throw things into the Pacific Ocean or into the ocean, right? So from 2014, the United Nations confirmed that there were at least 270,000 tons of plastic waste which was thrown into our ocean. And unfortunately, whatever piece of plastic was created from the time plastic was invented is still there on planet Earth. So we have not been able to understand how do we dispose it of. Even though plastic is both a boon and a bane, this is some kind of a huge crisis which we are working on. And there have been movements like CNET, which is looking at vacuuming the Pacific Ocean and removing the waste. But it is a case right now that there's not a single fish in the Pacific Ocean without a strain of plastic in them. I will just give you some video, some images from Chris Jordan. And this is an image of 426,000 cell phones. And this was done somewhere in this installation was done somewhere in 2012. So 426,000 cell phones was the number of cell phones which were retired only in the US, United States, every day around 10 years ago. So this would have multiplied almost 10 to 15 times, which means close to around 42 lakh cell phones are being disposed of every day in the United States alone. So just imagine the kind of impact we're throwing back into the ocean if you don't really understand the system, right? This is a beautiful painting which Chris Jordan worked on. This is something which he calls the Portraits of Global Mass Culture, which was done in 2011. This is of an artwork called Venus. This is close to 8 feet by 13 feet in dimension. 8 feet by 13 feet in dimension. And what does it have? It has over 240,000 plastic bags, which is estimated to be thrown out in the US alone every 10 hours, if I'm right. Right? So kind of humongous. We're talking about this in 2011. This is close-ups of that painting. So you can see each of these bags out there, the amount of the scale of bags which is packed together. If you can see my marker, I'm just marking onto one plastic bag there, and this is only part of the consumption thing which we're doing. Now, here I come to this question and ask you, who is responsible for this kind of a waste? Who is responsible for the kind of challenges we are facing today because of this thought? I would clearly put the blame on not on general human beings, but on designers, but on problem solvers. Because if we can redesign the process in such a way that we don't create waste, because we don't see waste in nature. So why should we create waste? I mean, why can't we learn from nature and not create waste, right? So, or why can't we look at how do you economize stuff? How do you relook at stuff? So I was in Professor Yatin Pandey's talk in the morning where he was talking about the different R's which we need to follow: the recycle, reuse, refuse, rediscover, and many such things. But I think the bottom, or rather the most basic thing which we need to do to literally rework on our whole consumption system is to redesign. We need to really understand how we can redesign so that we don't create our own graves. Today we are out to create our own graves. And where are we? I mean, this is something which I really like, a quote, which means that designers actually have more potential to slow environmental degradation than economists, politicians, and environmentalists together. Their power is catalytic, which means that as designers, we have the potential to literally work on redesigning systems, redesigning economics, redesigning political spheres, redesigning every aspect of our life, every problem we want to solve in such a way that we create a life-changing space for ourselves, for the human clan to move forward. So let's look at how does nature do it. These are certain rules of nature. This is generally what we do as a 3 to 4 hour session, but I'm trying to complete this in the next 30, 40 minutes. So one of some of the rules which we talk about is nature uses only the energy it needs and relies on freely available energy. Nature recycles all materials. Nature is resilient to disturbances, which means that it can address disturbances and move forward and resolve itself. Uh, I remember a huge forest fire catching over Bandipur, and as I drove past that place, all I saw was burned tree trunks. And 2 years later, when I drove through the same place, we were back to green landscape. So nature can address disturbances. Nature tends to optimize rather than maximize. Nature, I mean, look at the tree. I mean, it's always an inspiration for me. From the way it addresses resources, from the way it addresses simple things like collecting rainwater which falls in, from the way it addresses nitrogen fixers through its own leaves which are fallen down, and how it generates food using chlorophyll. It throws chlorophyll only to the top branches. I mean, I have two beautiful rain trees in front of my house, and I know how they respect each other. They're literally like brothers, because I don't know if you've heard of this thing called I forgot the name, cloud respect, if I'm right, where the branches move into each other but never overlap across two trees. So they respect each other. They start communicating. There's a beautiful book, if you can read, The Hidden Life of Trees, where they talk about how trees are able to communicate using fungal matter below in the roots and warn another tree of an attack by on another tree. So it's amazing the way nature tends to optimize rather than maximize. There's so much of creative, there's so much of inbuilt knowledge which we can borrow from nature. Nature provides mutual benefits. Nature runs on information. Nature uses chemistry and materials that are safe for living beings. There's nothing in nature which is non biodegradable. Um, it can address. I mean, I'm 100% sure that nature, in due course of time, will understand how to address the kind of waste we as human beings are living on planet Earth, and it will know that it can convert plastic into a food source. But the only thing is, nature is so powerful enough that it can shoo us out of the equation and say, enough of you guys, you better leave this ecosystem and let me rework on it in a different format. So nature uses chemistry of how it can deconstruct. I mean, today we already have certain bacteria which nature has produced, which can start eating into bacteria, right? So whatever, I mean, if I have to really look at the amount of fossil fuels we are using, what do we mean by fossil fuels? Fuel which is taken out of non-biodegradable material which was there when Earth could not decompose cellulose. What cellulose was available then when nature could not decompose, we are able to use that as fossil fuel. So definitely nature might look at plastics as another food for another source and start building using that. So nature builds using abundant resources, incorporating rare resources only sparingly. Nature is locally attuned and responsive. Nature uses shape to determine functionality. So, coming to looking at all of this, this is a book written by Michael. I'm sorry, I'm not able to pronounce their words, but names Michael Brognart and William McDonough. They came out with a book called Cradle to Cradle, which meant that a cradle is a birthplace. So, which said that is there a possibility for us to understand nature as something which is working from cradle to cradle, which means that when a child is born, and when I mean to say a child, when a process in nature is born, and after its death, it becomes food for another process because it becomes the birth of another process. So this is what he talked about as cradle to cradle. But how are we leading our lives? If I look at all the materials we've got, I mean, starting from organic material like banana peel, newspapers, cardboards, which anywhere require around a month of time, to diapers, which will require 600 years for it to decompose. I mean, diapers for sure, or even sanitary napkins have been in use, say, for the maximum of around, let's say, 100 years, if I'm really talking about 100 years, and we have already created so much of trash, right? We are creating so much of things which are just going into a sequence to things which is like glass bottles which can never be broken down, or even brick, burnt brick, which is one of the most highly undecomposable materials which we can have. So things like that we need to understand. So the kind of process which we follow is called the cradle to grave process, which means that we are following a very linear process of extraction and disposal. And in between, we have processing, design, manufacturing, distribution, use, repair, and disposal. And where do we dispose? We dispose it onto our landfill, we dispose it onto our oceans. We don't have a process of disposable yet. Out of the plastic waste we are creating, a maximum of around 8 to 9% of those plastic waste are being recycled, and remaining 92% of it is being sent to a landfill. So, as designers, isn't it our responsibility to start looking at how do we look at all of these processes, all of this design activities? I mean, as construction, as architects, we are one of the biggest consumption of material, consumers of materials for the building industry, and some of the most, what do you say, energy intensive processes what we follow, be it in terms of cement or steel or any of the materials. So I think somewhere we need to start moving towards just being creators of spaces, creators of unique spaces, to really looking at even working with chemists, even working with naturalists, even working with other genres in the coming days. But I see that this is the answer. I think very frankly, I don't see this as a pessimist approach, but I see this as an optimist, and say that let's shift from cradle to grave to cradle to cradle. And where have we moved? I mean, I'm still going into a little bit of really bringing in this awareness to all of you in terms of understanding where we are. There's some kind of a concept called Earth Overshoot Day, and please do look at this website called earthovershootday.org. This year, 2020, last year, we finished Earth Overshoot Day on 22nd of August, which meant thus by August 22nd, we've already consumed all the resources planet can replenish itself for that particular year, which means that after whatever we're using after August 22nd till December 31st, we start using it of the future generations. Sorry for the young kids that this is the kind of process we've left you into, and it's time that we bring move the date backward, and there are various methodologies, processes which we can follow to do so. This is the definition given by that organization, Global Footprint Network, which is a United Nations-based organization, which talks about Earth Overshoot Day, which marks the date when humanity's demand for ecological resources and services in a given year exceeds what Earth can regenerate in that year. It's quite scary for us to really understand that, according to their calculations, by 2025, the Earth Overshoot Day is being marked for June 30th, which means that on 2025 or a little later, we would be requiring 2 Earths to survive every year. We require 2 Earths to survive every year. And unfortunately, we don't have those 2 Earths. We only have 1 Earth to survive. So where does that lead us to? I mean, if I'm really looking at certain equations which I see here, if every human being in the world lives like an American today, we need 7 Earths. If every human being starts living like an Indian, we need around 1.8 Earths. So it is something which we really need to understand as to what is our lifestyle all about. If everybody starts living like a Somalian, we might require around zero point 0.8 Earths. But is that the kind of lifestyle? Is that the kind of depreciation in lifestyle we need to bring in? Absolutely not. I think the answer lies in the way we look at design solutions. So this is something which I request all of you to look at. And this is where I come into this idea of where we looked at from design thinking to design thinking through nature. Design thinking, as I mentioned earlier, was all about empathizing, understanding a problem, defining the problem, ideating on the problem, prototyping that problem, and then creating a test, finding out from people, and if required, go back to ideate or go back to redefining and things like that. But what we are doing in nature-inspired design thinking is going through a process of empathy, problem statement, and putting those questions across to nature, and as asking nature as to, nature, boss, how have you solved this problem? And nature would throw out a single-celled bacteria to a whale, which the same problem would be addressed in different ways. I mean, I will show you some examples of what we have done in a few projects in our workshops on how we went into that inquiry. And then when we go into that inquiry and find out from nature as to how have you done that, boss, nature creates a huge library of resources for us to document. So that's when we build a design matrix, which build a design matrix of putting across the problem statement and then saying, how has nature done this? Uh, Solutions, created solutions for all these 5 6 problem statements which I've created for based on my initial problem which I want to solve. And then you'll find a plethora of solutions from nature, and you get that plethora of stuff together and then start ideating with those in-house. And then you might find the solutions through geometry, you might find the solutions from chemistry, you might find the solution from philosophy of nature, you might find the solution from mechanics of nature, and with that you can create some amazing design solutions. And then I preferably go into prototyping, testing, and going back. This I see as something which can be used in any field of problem solving, be it a brainstorming session on how do I maximize or rather minimize expenditure in an organization, to how do I create a large span structure, or how do I create that whole beautiful visual space which we are in right now, the campus, where you look at all of those as simple leaf-like structures coming out, and we are inside that visual virtual space. So how do you ideate and create that kind of geometry? This is something which we can work on, right? So I think one of the most important activities of design thinking is about defining the problem. And I borrow this very famously shared quote of Albert Einstein, where he says that if I'm given an hour to save the planet, I would spend 59 minutes defining the problem and 1 minute to solve it. And it all goes down to defining how you define that problem. So it goes down to empathizing, understanding the people, understanding the challenges, understanding the requirements, and redefining the problem further to ask nature the right kind of questions. So I remember, I use this example quite regularly, where we were doing a workshop and we had a chemical engineer in our workshop who said that the soap which we use for bathing has a lot of acidic value to it. The pH value of a soap is greater than 7, and that in turn creates various challenges for human beings, like dryness, like the skin ailments and things like that. So he said it's important that we move from a soap to a shower gel, which is more alkaline in nature. Now, here is a very interesting problem where he said that I would want to make people use a shower gel, but this idea that a shower gel will get consumed much faster than a soap is what stops people from buying. So, how can I convert a shower gel into a soap? And he said that when we are doing it, when I have to harden any shower gel, I need to bring in the acidic value to it. So when we started questioning nature, and one of the questions of nature was about how does nature hold liquid and transfers liquid only unidirectional. And then he found answers in certain tadpoles which allowed water movement only unidirectional into that space, like the gills of a tadpole, right? Which allowed it to move in a unidirectional thing, and went into nano studies of that, and then said, here is a soap cover, a cover for holding the shower gel, but which only allows the shower gel to move out when rubbed on a skin and not otherwise. So just imagine how he could recreate a whole thing. I'm not saying this is still a cradle to cradle, but it's a way ahead in terms of saying that here is a beautiful inspiration I can use from nature. I will look at some more inspirations as I go further. Another great example which we can look at is the bullet train, which looked at the kingfisher's beak. Because if you look at the earlier bullet trains had a much more flatter snub of a facade. It didn't have this elongated beak-like frontage. It had a snub. So whenever it went into a tunnel, it was hitting itself into a wall of air. and that created a huge sonic boom for the bullet train to work in. And that also, when you're hitting against the high density air, the speed definitely drops down. And when they were redesigning, when they're relooking at all this, the chairman of the bullet train company was also a bird watcher, and they went into looking at the beaks of different birds, and they looked at the kingfisher's beak, wherein it smoothly guides itself into the water without creating any ripples. The second image, without creating any ripples, picks the fish and comes out. So it does not disturb any fish. It does not allow the fish to have any kind of a reflex action, and that's why they're known to be such brilliant fishers, the kingfisher bird. And they use that beak and put it onto a bullet train and increase speeds by almost 18%. And today, I mean, I was in Japan a few years ago, and I was shocked to find out that the cumulative delay, the total delay of all bullet trains from across Japan for a year is 6 seconds. 6 seconds is the cumulative delay of all bullet trains from across Japan. Beautiful, right? Beautiful. And some of them, I mean, some more examples like the Sharklet technologies, where Michael Phillip wore it for the first time, where people looked at the shark skin and found out the kind of nano cells which are shaped like the second image which you see there, and built fabric like using that concept, which is used by swimmers. And if you look at swimmers, they go and before getting into a dive, before getting into a race, they start pouring water onto their swimsuit, because it then moves and creates that flow drag with before they even get into the water. And the moment they dive into the water, they're literally moving smooth. They would have got a film of water on their body already. So things like that, right? Or like the butterfly or the beetle, which kind of uses the structured lighting, which kind of talks about reflecting light in a different format, so that you see it reflects all the colors that it can't absorb. So in one side, if I look at an apple and I say that the apple is looking at the structured light, which basically means that the apple is actually of all colors other than red, because it can only throw red out. And they did look at a little bit of studies on the which is that I think it's called the Morpholia blue butterfly, which looks at structured light or fragmenting light and throwing out brilliant incandescent blue, and then are now looking at creating paints out of that, which can make a building's color very radiant in terms of the kind of quality of sunlight which falls on it, and the building can change its own colors. Right, that's the kind of innovations we need to get into. Some examples of conceptual buildings like the bird's nest, which was done in I think New Zealand. And this was a project which we from my office looked at how a shell works and how an egg hatches, and try to look at recreating that as a very thin 1.5 inch thick shell structure, which could span close to around 40 feet. And the way we could look at the fragmentation of an egg and create a kindergarten out of it. So these are some images of that kindergarten which we designed in Bangalore. And the left-hand side, which I'm not showing more photographs of, is basically a column which inclines, where we looked at how a tree works and transverse load. So we have this inclined column inward at the bottom and outward at the first floor, and had the tie beams on the inside of the first floor and outside on the ground floor. They were looking at the way the tree transverse loads on a fork. And this in turn helped us reduce close to around 10% of the steel consumption of this building. So simple things like that. So more such questions in terms of how we can look at nature. What can a cluster of dandelions teach us about space exploration? How can owls help us build quieter wind turbines? Owls are one of the most quietest birds we find in the bird kingdom. the decibels out there is literally close to 0 decibels when you fly. So how can we learn from that and design wind turbines? These are all companies which have already started working on such issues. What can ants teach us about optimization, right? That's what we call a swarm intelligence. Today, what we are talking about, driverless cars, is based on the swarm technology. And I'll give you an example of the Southwest Airlines in the United States, which looked at this idea of swarm technologies and created a network where a flight can land into an airport and move out of the airport at its fastest, because the economy of a flight is when it's flying, not when it's on the tarmac, right? So they have created a whole system based on swarm technology on how aeroplanes can move to the right loading bay and move out at the fastest pace. Similarly, how they can look at people congregated inside the airport to move in and enter the aircraft in the most fast way. They've looked at ants and got inspirations from them. How can butterflies help us design mobile phones with longer battery life? Sorry. This is one case study which we did. This is one of the projects which we did with one of the students who wanted to design a multi-use, self-cleansing, environmentally friendly attire. And they started looking at is part of this process which we follow in terms of saying, how can I define the problem, how can I deconstruct that problem statement, and then how can I empathize on the problem. We follow a certain process called the 5 Ws, the 5W2Hs, which is about 5 Ys, which is about how do you go into the root cause of a problem statement, or how do you go wide in terms of saying who is facing the problem, what is the problem about, when is the problem being faced, where is it being faced, why is it being faced, how is this being faced, how many people are facing this problem. So you kind of build this whole multi-level way of understanding whys and whos and hows, and also understand the empathy mapping of saying how does the user feel, say, think, and does when he faces a problem, and what are the pains and gains. We create this whole matrix, and then we kind of create a problem statement, and then break that down into various questions of asking nature. I will give you some, I'll show you more examples of this. This is one presentation done by one of the participants in our workshop on nature inspired design thinking. I will just slide through the process. The problem which they wanted to solve was how can we help children carry heavy books. This is a simple problem which they talked about. And then when they talked about deconstructing the problem, they said, what is the specific problem? What is the result of the problem, the situation? Explain why the problem is a problem and things like that. So you talked about back pain and stress and so many other things, and then went into understanding why, the multi levels of why, until they find out what was the main why. Okay, the main why of this problem was why does the weight become excessive on the spine, and if that's something which we can solve. And they went into this whole query of why is the back falling, where can the load be distributed to, when does it become a major problem, how many different types of things do we have to carry, many such questions, so that you empathize and really look at the problem much cleaner, much detailed. And this is something which we can use for anything. This is something which we can use for, as I told you, for understanding structural systems. How can I design a span for multi-node transportation system, or for a stadium, or how do I do the detail of a joinery of a wood of a window? To that level we can go. I mean, it's there for every aspect. So you do an empathy mapping with the user in mind. We do something called a persona mapping. We do a lot of such things. So then we start changing the whole query process in terms of saying how can we, and we change the whole process in asking nature as to how does nature carry and transport heavy loads. So you look at inspirations like the elephant's foot, you look at pangolins, you look at tortoises, you look at the sleuth bear, and then you kind of ideate. I mean, this is something which happened over a 3-day activity where they looked at various aspects of of these four organisms. I would say if you build a matrix of around 100 organisms, you will be able to then use that matrix to brainstorm on various ideas. And this is an idea which they came across and said that let's look at the sloth, let's look at the elephant leg, let's look at various things and say that this is the kind of bag I can design for a child so that he does not feel carrying the bag is heavy. So this is a simple activity which we did in a 3 day process, right? So I think it's important that we start looking at nature as an inspiration, and this is something which I'm working on right now. In fact, today at 8 o'clock, in fact, I'm launching this for people who've already been a part of my earlier workshops. We are creating something called a natural change maker stripe, and this whole idea is to create over 1 million change makers who would look at the way we can solve problems using nature, and we take up live design problems and work on these live design problems. So we are looking at creating a tribe of design thinkers, critical thinkers, and this would, on becoming a part of our natural change makers tribe, we create a 2 month design sprint where we take up a real life problem and try and work on that. And we have this campfire, what I call as a campfire, as the 2 month campfire where we come out with design solutions. It could be design solutions to designing a new product. It could be designing design solutions to design an architectural language. It could be design solutions to design a product, to design a management system, to design a financial system, to could be take up United Nations sustainable goals, could be any of this, and address these as a group of people, brainstorm it. So get a designer on board, get a naturalist get on board, get a biologist on board, get a chemist on board, work together and kind of coming out on these problem solving. So that's something which we do. And I'm coming to the end. I think I hope I haven't overshot thing. Do request you to use your phones and scan this QR codes. You can find us on Instagram, on Facebook, where I could announce when we are doing the next workshop. Where if you are interested, if this whole school of thought interests you and you would like to join us for this whole school of thought, we are creating a program online where we are uh, putting up a lot of learnings on the various tools we can use for design thinking, and different processes which we follow for empathy mapping, different processes we follow for defining a problem, different processes we follow for rebuilding the design matrix with nature, the kind of queries we get into. So this is a group where we'll be kind of throwing in a lot of uh, inputs for people to work in. I mean, the intent is that can we make the world a much better, much safer place for us to survive for a longer time? Let's not bring about our extinction faster. Because at this pace, we are bringing in an extinction much faster. And today, we do understand how nature is quite such a powerful, you know, threat to human survival with the COVID situation. So, yeah, these are my links for you to log in, HCD Instagram and HCD Facebook. You can log in into that, become part of our community, and explore design thinking. And Hampi Center of Design is one of the ideas or the vision of Hampi Center of Design is also to bring design to the grassroots of every human being. So it is not about creating only a group of designers ideating on things, but we would like to bring design across to every human being. And one part of that activity is what we do in terms of India Design 101, where for 101 days we kind of share stories about India. We share stories about different artists from across the globe. We gave a small design activity which anyone can do in 10 minutes. And this is an email based activity. And if anyone's interested to join us for that activity, the India Design 101, on the right hand side, you can see the QR code and you can log into that. So thank you for this opportunity. And I shall be, um, you know, I'm open to any queries or questions. Do I stop sharing, Rachna? Yes. Any queries? Any thoughts?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. It was a great. The workshop was a really great insight on nature-inspired design thinking, and I guess a lot of audience members have gained a very great refined perspective on how this can be taken ahead. So I guess they are more than willing to join your workshop, and there will be a lot more queries generated there. As of now, we do not have queries from the audience section. But it was a great workshop nonetheless.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much. Yes, thank you so
Pleasure is
much,
mine.
sir.
Pleasure is mine. Yeah, we did. I mean, this is something which we do as almost a 6 to 7 hours of a workshop, or now we're kind of curating it to close to recorded videos of 100 hours. So, in a 1 hour session, I can only give a glimpse of what is in the world of nature, right?
Yes, that
You
is
can
more than
find
sir
some
enough.
amazing situations. Yeah.
Yes, and it's it ignited a few great minds regarding nature inspired design thinking. And so it
Awesome.
was a
Awesome.
great workshop. Thank you, sir. Thank you
Thank
for
you.
joining us. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes.